The story you're about to listen to is based on a true event. A story of a wretched hoodlum, thief, and a troubled man named Ken. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. In the bustling city of Lagos, Nigeria, where the streets pulse with life, dreams, and, sometimes, darkness, there lived a man named Ken. Tall, dark-skinned, with piercing eyes that had seen the shadows of society, Ken had grown up in the slums of Lagos. To some, he was a mystery, to others, he was simply a thief. Ken's life had never been easy. His father had abandoned the family when he was a child, and his mother struggled to make ends meet, working multiple jobs that kept her away from home for days on end. Ken was left to navigate the streets on his own, often getting into fights and learning to survive by whatever means necessary. By the age of 15, he had fallen into petty theft, stealing wallets and phones in the crowded Lagos markets. The thrill and the quick money kept him going. As he grew older, Ken became known in the underbelly of Lagos. He was skilled, swift, and fearless, a legend in the circles of crime. But there was a void in his heart he couldn't fill. No matter how much he stole or how many people he deceived, he was always haunted by an emptiness that gnawed at his soul. Still, he pushed it aside, telling himself that he was only doing what he had to survive. One night, after a successful heist in Victoria Island, Ken sat on a rooftop, looking over the city lights. The cool night breeze touched his skin, and he felt a strange pang of guilt. He had just robbed a young woman of her life savings, her laptop, cash, and phone, all gone in an instant. She had looked at him with such terror in her eyes, her voice trembling as she begged him to let her keep just enough to get home. But Ken had ignored her pleas. Now, sitting alone in the dark, he could hear her voice echoing in his mind, her fear reaching out to him across the void. The guilt was an unwelcome companion, but he couldn't shake it. His mind raced, pulling him back to the memories of his mother and the nights they had gone to bed hungry, the sacrifices she had made for him. How disappointed would she be if she knew what he had become? That thought was a dagger in his chest. 2 weeks later, while walking through the street, Ken encountered a preacher on the street. He usually avoided such people, seeing them as fanatics, but something about this preacher's words stopped him in his tracks. God's grace is sufficient for even the worst sinner, the preacher declared passionately, his voice rising above the noise of the city. No one is beyond redemption. The words struck Ken like a lightning bolt. His heart pounded as he stood frozen, staring at the preacher. The man seemed to look straight at him, as though he could see the darkness in Ken's soul. Without realizing it, Ken stepped closer. The preacher noticed him and smiled warmly, gesturing for him to come closer. Hesitantly, Ola approached, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over him. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Ken said quietly, barely able to meet the preacher's eyes. The preacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us do, my brother. But God's mercy is for those who seek it. No matter what you've done, He can heal you." Ken couldn't hold back the tears that welled up in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt something other than guilt and anger. The preacher prayed for him, and that night, Ken returned to his small, run-down apartment with a heavy heart but a glimmer of hope. For days, he grappled with his emotions, his memories of his crimes, and his desire for something better. He decided to seek out the preacher again, desperate for answers. To his relief, he found the man at the same spot, preaching to the crowd with unwavering conviction. This time, Ken stayed and listened for hours. The words began to seep into his heart, awakening a yearning he had long buried. He felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child: hope. Over the next several months, Ken attended church services, participated in prayer meetings, and slowly let go of his old ways. The transformation was not easy. The people who knew him mocked his attempt at change, calling him a hypocrite and questioning his sincerity. Yet he persevered, clinging to the belief that he could change, that he was not destined to be the thief he had been. Eventually, Ken became a regular member of the church. He spent hours each day studying the Bible, finding solace and wisdom in the scriptures. He confessed his sins to the pastor, pouring out years of pain, guilt, and regret. The pastor, an elderly man named Pastor Michael, listened patiently, offering words of comfort and encouragement. "God has a purpose for your life, Ken," Pastor Michael said one evening after listening to Ken's tearful confession. "Perhaps your journey can serve as a testimony to others who are lost." And so, after years of wandering in darkness, Ken began to see a glimmer of light. He took small steps toward redemption, joining the church's outreach programs, helping those less fortunate, and sharing his story with anyone who would listen. To his surprise, people began to listen, captivated by the tale of a thief-turned-penitent man. He became a source of inspiration to those who, like him, had been lost. Eventually, the church elders, seeing his dedication and transformation, encouraged him to pursue ministry. Though hesitant at first, Ken felt a calling he couldn't ignore. He enrolled in a local theological school, studying day and night, determined to understand the faith that had saved him. After years of diligent study, Ken was ordained as a pastor. He returned to his old neighborhood, setting up a small church in the street, where he had once roamed as a thief. Standing before his congregation for the first time, Ken felt a wave of emotions, gratitude, humility, and, above all, peace. He looked out at the faces before him, some of whom had known him as the street thief he once was, and he smiled. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his voice steady and filled with conviction, "I stand here not as a perfect man but as a redeemed one. If God could take a thief like me and turn me into a messenger of His word, then He can do the same for anyone." The congregation listened in awe as he shared his story, his voice breaking at times but never losing its strength. He spoke of the darkness he had lived in, the choices he had made, and the grace that had saved him. People wept, some coming forward to confess their own sins, others reaching out to him for comfort and guidance. For years, Ken continued to serve as the pastor of that humble church, dedicating his life to helping others find the redemption he had once thought impossible. His story spread beyond the street, reaching the ears of people across Lagos and beyond. He became known not as Ken the thief, but as Pastor Ken, a man who had been saved by grace and who, in turn, dedicated his life to bringing hope to those who had none. But Ken's journey was not without sorrow. He never married, feeling unworthy of love after all he had done. He carried the scars of his past, reminders of a life he could never fully escape. Yet, he found peace in his work, knowing that he was finally walking the path he was meant to walk. One evening, as he sat in his church alone, reflecting on his journey, Ken felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He whispered a quiet prayer, thanking God for the grace that had saved him. And as the last rays of sunlight streamed through the church windows, casting a warm glow over him, he felt a peace he had never known, a peace that assured him that, no matter his past, he was finally home.